It almost feels a little sad. We're closing in, or depending on when you're watching this, the season has already ended for Spark of the Rebellion. The store showdowns are in the books, at least at the time of this recording. Around the country, around the world, there's probably a handful still occurring, but for the most part, everybody's kind of looking forward to set 2, so expect a lot of jank if you're playing in local weeklies. But we're going to talk about a recent event that just happened this past weekend, and a little bit about the decks, and maybe some other thoughts I have, both about the season and looking forward. Now, this event was hosted at Topdeck Games over in New Jersey. Now, I played there when they were at their old store for a variety of other card games, and every time it's always been a pleasure to be at the store. So shout out to them. I do also want to make special mention that they started the event much earlier than most of the other showdowns that I was able to attend. So again, shout out to them, because that means that I didn't have to wait until like 9 or 10 p.m. to get another meal in for the day, which is, yeah, you got to plan this stuff for tournaments, even for what should be a quote unquote quick one at only 5 rounds. It's the way it is. It's the tournament competitor's life. If you've been in that position, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. This particular event featured, I believe it was either 25 or 27 people. I could have sworn that I saw the tables go out farther than maybe what they did, but somebody did confirm that there was a bye round 1. So we had one of our larger turnout tournaments, and I kind of understand why. It is the end of the season. People want to get it in, get those last ditch attempts to take down a showdown. Now, I did participate in this one. Obviously, we'll get to that. I unfortunately did not get all of the deck lists. We'll talk about the general meta that occurred for this particular event. Overall, there was a staggering lack of Sabine. I think there was a single Sabine in the entire event, and it was Sabine Yellow in particular. Now, I know that didn't make it up onto this graphic, but I think it's worth calling out what we were looking for. There was a bunch of Krennic running around. There were multiple yellow Bobas running around, and it, in general, seemed to be a mid-range control player's I don't want to say paradise, because they all had to play each other, which is generally a miserable experience, but they certainly were showing up in droves. There were a few Hans, a few other things here and there, all of the usual suspects, and I even saw a Chewie list that showed up. We'll talk about one of the other decks in a little more detail when we talk about what I played, but there was a Chirrut Red that was running around and did very well. I want to also point out here at the beginning, I want to give a couple shout outs. I did have a player come up to me and said that they had watched my Boba Yellow video when I did the breakdown a few weeks ago at this point, and it helped them get a 5th place finish in a different showdown. They had come up to me before the event. So that definitely made me feel good. Shout out to them. If you see me at any events, if you're going to Gen Con, or if you see me at locals, or I do want to travel I'm going to try and make it to, for example, Baltimore for Star City Games. Hopefully I can make it. If you see me, feel free to come up to me, say hello, let me know. I am horrendous with names, so forgive me ahead of time, but it felt really cool. So shout out to them. I'm going to give a few other shout outs as we go through, but I just wanted to get that one out at the front. Now, when we talk about what ended up at the top tables by the end of the event, obviously there was the lack of Sabine, but notably there was this high point in the Leias. There were multiple Leias in this event, and 2 of them ended up top 8ing. Now, one of them got to top 4. Spoiler alert, I had to play against them. The other one, who I played against in the Swiss, ended up, I believe, getting eliminated by one of the Krennic builds, which is something that we could talk about as well. The Krennic builds were doing very well, and I think it was a great meta choice. The uptick in yellow Bobas, both at this event as well as overall, and then the threat it presents against a variety of different decks, and something that was doing well way back at the beginning of the meta and has now circled back in. It's a very interesting thing to keep in mind going into set 2, this general rotation of builds and archetypes. If you played other card games competitively, this is not going to shock you in any way, shape, or form. Krennic does allow you to play some of the most powerful cards in the game, as well as presenting a reasonably powerful leader in and of himself. So therefore, there's no real reason for it to drop off the face of the earth forever. Only temporary as other things come and maybe knock it off that pedestal. And that's kind of what happened in this event, because we ended up seeing the Palpatine causing a lot of problems for our Krennic players. Now, notably, we also had double Palpatines, and of course, as you can tell here, one of them ended up taking down the whole thing. So congratulations to them. It was definitely awesome seeing the work that they put in. They played very well. I had the opportunity to watch some of their games, and spoiler, they beat me too. So like I know they played it well. I watched it happen. I was participating in this, but it was definitely very well piloted. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is that these Krennic lists, you kind of saw the way you'd expect the meta to have broken out in. It was a microcosm of the macro, obviously. What ended up happening is the Krennics were able to beat up on, say, the Leias, but then got eaten alive by the Palpatines, and then ended up, it was Boba Palp finals. So anyway, let's take a look at the actual lists themselves. Now, as mentioned, I don't have all of the deck lists. If anybody later has deck lists that they want to tell me about, if you have a link to SWU or something, we'll throw them in the description. At this point, I think everybody's kind of seen everything. If you really want the deck list description in the description, let me know. I will try and edit them later. Everybody sent me images of their deck list. So shout out to everybody who responded to the call, first of all. But if people really want the deck lists, I mean, a lot of these are going to look mostly standard with some tech choices. So you as the viewer should be able to handle it. I have confidence in you. But this is the Boba Green list that was piloted by one of the members of the Golden Dice podcast. So shout out to them, because it was actually really cool to get the opportunity to talk to them for a little bit. Check out their stuff. So like I said, shout out to them. I actually played this person in the Swiss as well. I was just exceptionally lucky. Bottom line is, as you can tell, I was playing Boba Yellow. They did not end up seeing a whole lot of overwhelming barrages, and when they did, I was able to strip some away. Now, there's some unique tweaks here. We do have a Singleton Cunning main deck. We have a lower Greedo count. Shoot firsts are there. There were two cheeky recruits, which did end up coming into play in one of the games. It didn't quite put things over the top, but it is there. Resupply, we're looking at only 2, and it's notable because we're starting to see resupply. I mean, it's been falling off for a while in set 1, but it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in set 2, because set 2, I'm starting to see people start to skip it, even in what seem to be more dedicated, maybe not, obviously not full ramp, but more later game focused decks, late mid-range into control build. So we'll see how that ends up shaping up as we move into set 2. Other than that, for the most part, the main board looks fairly standard. You do have, like I said, a lot of shaving here and there. 2 guards, 2 Greedos, 2 shoot first, 2 cartels, 2 smugglers. None of these cards necessarily raise a red flag that they exist. It's more that the numbers are shaved in order to squeeze in room for other things. Like I said, the Singleton Cunning, for example, the 2 copies of Recruit, notably also a 2. But if you want to include all these cards, you got to find room somewhere. Also, notably, 2 No Good to Me Deads, which clearly for my matchup, that came into play because it matters if you can't No Good to Me Dead the Boba. Although it does, I thought I overheard them playing the Chirrut player when I had finished one of my later, I think it was like round 5 or something, because I remember them saying I heard someone explaining the Boba Fett interaction, where Boba Fett Jr., where it's able to snipe leaders much more readily. So I presume there was a No Good to Me Dead involved there as well, but that's kind of a digression. Looking at the board, extra shoot first, change of heart, the extra Gamma guards, Consortium Star Viper, and Reinforcement Walker. You got the mix of things to deal with more aggressive opponents. You have some options for more controlling opponents, but Boba is just powerful. Sometimes it just goes, I do Boba things and I'm going to win. So I believe this player said that they did end up with 2 losses at the end of the day, but it was against the undefeated player who was a Leia player, and then myself, who was X1 at on Boba Yellow. So if you're considering Boba for set 2, here's a good place to start as any, as you start tweaking with the new toys. Next, we're going to look at one of the Leia builds. As mentioned, there were 2, and I believe this player was the one who was rank 1 and undefeated coming into the top 8, I believe. They'll have to correct me on that. But there's definitely some spice in here and some unique takes that you probably wouldn't necessarily expect. I did talk to the players, both Leia players, about their opinion on Leia versus Sabine. And I think what I took from the conversations was just, it's more of a preference thing. They had initially started out, both of them, I believe, saying that they felt that Leia was stronger than Sabine, but then kind of walked it back a little bit in the sense that they said, well, Sabine can definitely pour it on a little bit better, but they were certainly way more comfortable with Leia. And when we're talking about a game like Star Wars Unlimited, I think there is a lot of value to simply just playing the deck that you know best rather than trying to follow the trend, because there is a lot of room for skill expression and you can simply outplay your opponent. And yeah, most people are probably prepared for Sabine and they probably think, oh, well, I'm going to if Leia shows up, I'm going to do the same thing. But it isn't quite the same angle that you're getting attacked on. Leia does operate slightly differently. And of course, these 30 health bases versus a 25 health ECL can clearly throw off a lot of people's math. Now, notably here, we're looking at 2 medal ceremony, only 1 heroic sacrifice main, and we're seeing rebel assaults on the board. I kind of lump them together. We always talk about the pumps. And instead of additional pumps, we're getting open fire main deck, which did actually catch me off guard, and I'm sure it caught a bunch of people off guard throughout the day, where something gets removed and you just don't expect it. A lot of builds have moved into Akbar for a similar effect, or operating with just without something. So the open fire can definitely catch people and force an important break point. So you can definitely snipe some things to either win the mirror because, hey, you get their K2SO before they get a chance to actually do something with it, or a variety of other stuff. Maybe it was buffed by medal ceremony or other experience tokens, helps you plow through the hypothetical Lieutenant Child sins because now it's open fire plus a smaller body, clears the path for the rest of your team, that sort of thing. So definitely a cool inclusion there. Speaking of Child Sin, we of course have the Spec Force soldiers and a lot of other things we're going to mostly skip over, like the Mon Mothmas, the A-Wings, the Fire for Freedom, Red Thread. Like you've seen all this stuff before. Notably though, only 2 copies of Sabine Wren. I didn't know that at the time, so I'd love to know why they went that route. And also 3 copies of U-Wing main deck. That's a crazy top end, but can clearly get you back in games that you would have lost, or put the final nail on the coffin to close the game out, because you're going to find these U-Wings. And of course, given the way the resourcing system works, all right, I get it early, it's going to become a resource and we'll worry about it later. Now, interestingly enough, the Guerrilla Attack Pods do make a reappearance here. Was in earlier aggro builds. Like it was a staple in earlier aggro builds, kind of fell out of favor, but it's coming back in here, and it obviously served them very well throughout the day. Wedge also makes an appearance here, which is pretty cool, giving the opportunity to have, whether it's the attack pods or anything else, get a buff and ambush. Dodona has obviously demonstrated how powerful it can be to break mirror setups, because all my guys are something bigger than all of your guys, or just to put on pressure against other decks. Wedge seems to be operating in a similar vein, where now all of a sudden your Green Squadron A-Wings, instead of attacking for 3, are attacking for 4, which may sound insignificant, but it adds up incredibly quickly, like unbelievably quickly. And anybody who's been on the receiving end of it, I'm sure they know. It's also, you can't ignore the fact that Wedge on his own is a sizable body. It's also notably a rebel, so you get some synergy there, all that cool stuff. Now, I was kind of dancing around some of these other things, but I, of course, would be remiss if I didn't bring up Benthic 2 Tubes, which I will say my wife thought that name was hilarious, and Partisan Insurgent. these are things that I do really like, and honestly, I'm kind of interested in seeing how they play out into the next set, whether more mono aggression builds or anything like that start to make an appearance. We'll have to see how that plays out, but they are notably not hero units. So the math on your for cause, which we'll come back to, changes a lot. I know people are immediately looking through the deck list for that for a cause. Trust me, we'll get there. But I do like both of these additions because they are fairly significant threats. And I can tell you right now, the Partisan Insurgent was absolutely super annoying when I had to deal with it. Yes, you can kill it. Yeah, sure. In my case, boss can run into it. But that Partisan Insurgent can absolutely apply a ton of pressure and close something out surprisingly quickly with 3 attack on a 1-drop that requires probably multiple cards to be sunk into it early in the game at the very least in order to get it off the board. Open fire, takedowns, withstanding, that sort of thing. So those are pretty cool additions, and obviously this deck tries to skew more red. I'd love to know, like I said before, why there isn't an extra Sabine, because that obviously it synergizes well with both Benthic as well as the Insurgent. But definitely pretty cool, and clearly helped this player out, did a great job. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, there's the extra Sabine. We got the Rebel Assaults. Wolf makes sense. Disabling Firefighter. But here's the crazy thing. Like, this is the thing that I'm sure once you may just assume that it's there in the main 50. But as soon as you see it in the board, you're going to be like, wait, what? And I didn't get to ask them about this, and I didn't know until after they sent me the list. But the For a Cause I Believe in is in the board, which is that's a mind-blowing thing to me, because that seems like one of the best cards for aggro. But given the way the main deck is structured, I kind of understand it that you have less heroism units than you do in your typical Leia or Sabine lists. As a result, those For a Cause I Believe in just may not be as good. But it is an important tool, so I'd love to hear more feedback from the player on how this has felt for them overall over the long haul. Obviously, on any given day, maybe it feels good or bad, but it sounded as though they had been playing this list for an extended period of time or something very similar. Obviously, the Leia build in general, but I would love to know when For a Cause I Believe in got cut to go to the board instead. So shout out to them. Congratulations. And then we get this guy. That guy. This is me. I took second place here. My route through top 8 was, as mentioned earlier, I played against Boba Green, and I played against Leia, and then I got eliminated in the finals by Green Palpatine, which we'll talk about momentarily. The list is, you can check it out in my other video. I'll put that up on screen for you so that you can see it. You can check out the list. It's a standard setup. The main things that I did try some experimental sideboard options in Power of the Dark Side and Millennium Falcon. Had to shave a few things that were not like, so it's a little different from the previous one. But for the most part, I'll be honest, I never boarded them in. I just did Boba things all day, Boba Yellow things. My loss in the Swiss was to Cheer It Red. I feel like I think I misplayed in one game. I lost the roll, so I only had initiative first in the game I won, and I lost the 2 that I didn't have initiative. I think if I had initiative, I would have won, like if I had started with it, just because of the way the tempo had played out. In one of the games, the third game, I believe it was, I just could not withstand the aerial assault. It was like triple A-wing or something like that. And I couldn't find a 7th Fleet Defender to save my life, quite literally. So we lost in round 3. But ended up top 8ing anyway. I just don't see this deck going away in set 2. Any version of Boba, there will be something. Compared to the Leia list, where at least at this time, I don't even know how many Rebels are in set 2 right now. So Leia may take a hit there, not just in terms of popularity, but just also effectiveness, because Leia's you just don't get as many new tools. Maybe it's fine without those new tools, but we'll have to see. Whereas Boba, whether it's yellow, whether it's green, just gets an enormous amount of new toys. I'm sure you've all seen most of them by now. and I'm excited to try it out. Now, our last one that we're going to be looking at is Mono Green Palpatine. This one, it's like it came full circle way back when we saw Craigslist, and now we have this one. So again, shout out to our champion and congratulations. I couldn't quite breach the defenses. It went to 3 games. It was the same sort of situation where I lost the role, did not have initiative, except for the game that I won. I think I would have gotten there in game 3 or even maybe game 1 if I had had initiative, because just the way the tempo was playing out. But they played it exceptionally well. So I have to, and all my opponents did. Like everybody that I played against was a very strong player. So congratulations again, and shout out to them. As far as the list itself goes, notably the Yularians are main. I know for the mono green list, it seems as though this is fairly standard. Makes sense, right? Admiral Piet is obviously a very big deal. They're both officials, which, given the Emperor Royal Guards, everything ties in very, very nicely. Interestingly enough, there are still TIE Advance in this deck. I saw it on the table as I was watching an earlier match, and it's always interesting to see if these sort of things, because the Advance can be kind of clunky, but it can clearly make a big difference. Full set of Traitorous. Here's the top end. The top end is actually, when you think about it, it's horrifying. If being on the other side of it, you got full sets of Vader, full sets of Relentless, and then Devastator. You can see why things like Krennic or other decks that don't necessarily want the game to go late, if the game gets late, it's just locked up. I don't know how you fight through these things. There's just too much thick on the side of the board, and I wanted to play Vader Ramp because I love the idea of I'm just going to play a Star Destroyer every turn from here until the end of the game. And I mean, there's only technically 2 different ones here, but it's a similar thing of I'll go Vader, I'll go Relentless, I'll go Devastator. Good luck. Like, try and stop me, because you're probably not. But it's a very interesting list. One thing that is, to me, fantastically aesthetic is that it's just so many 3-ofs and a 2. I know I've talked about the advantages of, you can have this 1-of, and then it's great in this matchup, or you shave a number here, shave some numbers there, and then squeeze in all this stuff. To me, it just gives me a warm fuzzy inside to be like, no, it's a playset, it's a playset, it's a playset, it's a playset, it's a playset. All right, we have to have 2 because we can't have the full 3. Well, I guess you could, but suboptimal. But anyway, aesthetics aside, we can look at the board. Singleton Repair, Confiscate, Patrolling V-Wings, Homestead Militia, which did come up in my game, Strike True, and Devastator. So I don't know how much boarding was actually necessary. I mean, against, for example, me, I assume that it was the Homesteads, Repair, and Strike Trues came in. You could probably drop some Star Destroyers and a few other things in order to squeeze them in. Obviously, the reverse is true for against control decks. You could bring in the V-Wings, you could bring in the Devastators, keeps the cards flowing, and then you get to the late game, and Palpatine, obviously, control magic something, and you can just ruin your opponent. It's something that I'm interested to see how Palpatine decks evolve in the new meta. As things move forward. Palpatine does, for example, have an interesting way to deal with Krayt Dragon, which is something that a lot of people have pointed to as, this is going to be a great answer to close out games against control. Well, it's also pretty good when you get to steal it and then lock your opponent out of the game, because now they can't even deal with their own 10-10 that's going to shoot all their guys, or the base for that matter. And Palpatine can absolutely close games out in a hurry, because, all right, I played Devastator, I already have a Vader on the board. You're just not living very long after that. So, again, shout out to our champion. Another local. A lot of the faces there, I will say, overall, a lot of people came out that I've seen both at other events as well as at the locals, physically at Topdeck and other places. So, it was awesome to see people coming out. I hope that we're getting everybody coming out for both the local events and future tournaments down the line. Well, like I said, it's a little sad, but that is seemingly the end of our first Store Showdown season. Spark of the Rebellion's going to kind of get put to bed a little bit as we get Shadows of the Galaxy coming in. We'll see how things play out. I'm excited for the next Store Showdown season. All the competitive events that are coming up, whether they are from third parties like Star City Games, they are at stores such as Topdeck, or they're going to be first party like at Gen Con. I might have some other drama-related videos coming out, specifically about some of the tournament rules, which I think are going to probably come up at Gen Con. So let me know if you're interested in hearing some of those, because I'm a little bit torn about doing them, but I think I want to do it, get my 2 cents out there, and then just see what other people's feedback are. I'm open to changing my opinion on some of these things, but there's some tournament stuff that I think needs to change. But that's a talk for another time. Definitely a lot of fun throughout this season. As I said, I'm very much looking forward to future ones. But that's going to do it for this video. So as always, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And tune in next time for more Random's Thoughts.